Feeling real tipsy, getting real freaky, and it's getting real frisky.
Maybach music.
So this couple comes in together to buy an engagement ring, and they had a budget of about $20,000, which is a lot for an engagement ring. But the ring that she happened to pick out was about $35,000, which is a lot of money. And she was really adamant about picking it, and he was kind of reserved, like, it is a lot of money. But she's like, no, if you love me, you'll buy it, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, you know what? You're going to be my wife, the mother of my kids, whatever makes you happy. So after they finally decide, I pack it up for them. I'm like, here you go. Have a great marriage. Have a great life. Goodbye. About 3 weeks later, the fiance comes in, and I'm thinking she just wants to get the ring size or something. And she's like, can you guys take out the diamond and replace it with a cubic zirconium? Cubic zirconium is a very cheap substitute for a diamond. So I was like, yeah, we can do that, but just give us 2 or 3 days. So she leaves, and I call her fiance because I was like, oh, this is really suspicious. And he had no idea that she came into the shop or that she was coming in. So he calls me 2 days later, and he finds out that she was going to break up with him. She would have kept that diamond, and she would have given him the fake one. He would have returned it, and he would have gotten no money back. Talk about mess.
Story time about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him. My mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, hey, I think I saw your husband on the news. So after that, she showed me the news article, and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking, and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car, because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols, these were 2 big-ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club. And somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection. And it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you.
This is why you should never leave the table when you're on a blind date. One of my best friends and I worked at the same restaurant. When I came in later that day for my shift, she told me a crazy story. She said that her first table were this guy and this girl, and she could tell they were on a first date. The girl was nervous, so she ordered a glass of wine. As far as she knew, the date seemed to be going well, and the girl got up to go to the bathroom. Right when my friend was about to come over and bring the silverware, she saw him put something in her wine. My friend, obviously terrified and freaking out, let our manager know, who then let the police know, and ran into the bathroom to tell her what was going on. The girl ended up staying in the bathroom until the police came, arrested him, and escorted him out of the building. It was noon on a Tuesday. You don't think you're going to be drugged at noon on a Tuesday.
If you've ever thought about getting your ears pierced, don't do what she did. This is the urban legend about a girl in Japan who tried to do it, then ended up with horrifying consequences. So this young girl really wanted to get her ears pierced. After some pleading with her parents, they finally agreed and gave her some money to go do it. But instead, the girl kept the money and decided to pierce them herself and let her friend help her. They heated up a large needle and went for it one day. It was painful, but in the end, she was happy she could finally wear earrings. However, this wouldn't last long. One day in school, she felt an intense pain in her left ear. Her earlobe was itchy, and by the end of the day, she had a headache. She went into the bathroom and saw her ear was very inflamed. Then she looked closer and saw a piece of white string sticking out of her new piercing. She picked and pulled at it, which only made the string longer. Now it was hanging out of her earlobe. The string seemed to be endless. The more she pulled, the longer it got. Finally fed up, she took a pair of scissors and cut the string. Suddenly, everything went black. There was a burning pain in her ears and her eyes. She began to scream. In the hospital, it was revealed that it wasn't a piece of string at all. She had pulled out a piece of her optic nerve and cut it. She would be blind for the rest of her life.
My friend ate her pets. Story time. When I was in college, living in the dorms, we were not allowed to have pets. And at the time, I was friends with this girl, and we're gonna name her Vicky. And she was known for not following the rules. So one day, Vicky decides that she's gonna get some pet snails and bring them into the dorms. So she buys like 4 snails, buys them a little bowl, gets them little decorations, and sets them up inside of her room. And she was able to keep them a secret for about a month. Until one day, we had room inspections. So the RAs go around inspecting everybody's room, and then they come to mine. And while they're in my room, I text Vicky and I'm like, hey girl, they're coming to your room next. Make sure you hide your pet snails. And she texts me back and she's like, oh shoot, what am I supposed to do with them? And jokingly, I was like, eat them. They do it in France all the time. So after a while, the inspections are over and I head over to Vicky's room. And when she opened the door, she looked kind of sad. So I was like, what's wrong? Did they find your snails? And she was like, no, I ended up eating them. And I look over and their bowl is empty.
Story time of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. My older sister never really liked me as a child. We were never close. I never knew why, but I was guessing it was because of the 10-year age gap. But I'm pretty sure she hated me because she couldn't even look me in the eye. I cannot make this up. She would not look me in the eye. But she never really talked to my parents either. She kind of just kept to herself all the time. Sometimes I have vivid memories of when we were younger and she would always be arguing with my parents about something, and I always thought it had something to do with me. Well, I was right. It had everything to do with me because eventually my sister turned 18 and she moved out. For 2 years, I didn't talk to her at all. I honestly don't even think I had her number saved, and I'm pretty sure that she didn't have mine. Well, 2 years later, and I was 10 at the time, she reached out to me via social media. I'm not sure how she found my Instagram name, but it was just my name, so she probably just typed that in and found me. She DM'd me and told me that she wanted to talk about something very important and that she would like to talk over the phone. So we exchanged numbers and we called that same night. And she told me that when she was younger, my dad had taken advantage of her and gotten her pregnant and had me. This is part 2 of how I found out that my mom was actually my older sister. So like I said, my older sister had reached out to me via social media and told me that she was actually my mother. And so after we got off the phone that same night, I lost it at dinner and I went off on my parents and I screamed at them. And I told them that I would go to the police and tell them everything and I would tell them the truth unless they just let me live with my older sister. And they tried to explain themselves, and their reasoning was that they wanted to keep the family together because of their traditional values, and it would have just made their lives a lot harder going through all the court proceedings, so they just kept the family together. And so they clearly didn't want me to go into the police, so they said that I could go live with my older sister. So she came to get me, but she lived in a different state, so it kind of took a while. I still had to stay in the house for like a week or so before she came, but I packed all my stuff and I was ready to go. And when we went back to where she lived, we immediately called the police and told them everything. Fast forward a little bit, they did some DNA testing. My sister's DNA matched as my biological mother's, and then my dad was my biological father, and they saw how the ages just didn't match properly, so they took my father to jail.
I literally want to cry. So if you didn't know, I have a sister, and her name's Ashley, and we both have boyfriends. And every night we both fall asleep on the phone with our boyfriends. So one day we're all hanging out and we're like just talking. And my sister's boyfriend looks at me and he's like, you need to stop going into your sister's room in the middle of the night. And I look at him and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have a reason to go into her room. Like I don't go into her room, especially in the middle of the night. Then my boyfriend hops in the conversation and he's like, no. He's like, no, I hear Ashley go into Kayla's room every night and stare at her. So me and my sister both look at each other and we're like, we don't go into each other's rooms, do we? And we agreed that we do not. And they said this has been going on for months. So for months, somebody or something has been going into me and my sister's room for about 15 minutes every night and watching us sleep. But it only gets worse.
This is the reason why everybody thought I dropped out of high school. Over the 4 years of high school, I was probably in school a total of 100 times altogether. And this wasn't because I was lazy, I mean partially, but it was mostly because I had really bad stomach problems. So I always had these doctor's appointments, I was always missing school because my stomach hurt. So then my junior year, since my attendance was really bad, they decided to put me on home instruction. This means that teachers would come to my house for about 2 hours a day, 3 days a week. And my teachers had to bring with them these time slips. For example, saying that they saw me from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And when I was a minor, my dad had to sign it. And when they hand in those time slips, those are the hours they're getting paid for. So I had this one teacher. She was my history teacher, but we would literally just gossip the entire time. She was mad chill. Sometimes, though, she would cancel on me, and sometimes I would cancel on her. But this was my senior year, so I was 18. So I was able to sign the time slips. So I saw her once a month when I was supposed to see her 4 times a month. So every time she came, I signed 4 time slips.
This is why you should never take a prank too far. Once there were 2 young twins who lived in a small town and they were known for constantly misbehaving. One day a man had passed away peacefully in his home and the twins wanted to play a prank on everyone else living in the town, so they snuck into the house and started messing with the man's body. One twin moved his mouth like a puppet and the other one poked his eyes out with a stick. As they were doing this, they heard footsteps. They couldn't find anywhere to hide, so they placed the body back in the coffin, then got in the coffin themselves and closed the lid. But what they didn't know was they were taking the coffin straight to the funeral. The people carrying the coffin noted that it was much heavier than usual but brushed it off. No one even noticed that the twins were gone until the coffin was lowered. The twins' mother appeared at the cemetery about the missing twins, which stopped the funeral and began a search. Eventually, the man carrying the coffin confessed that the coffin had weighed more than it was supposed to, so they lifted it out and opened the lid. They did find the boys there, but they found them lying on top of the body, whose hands were wrapped tightly around each of their necks. The twins had been strangled to death.
This is why you should always trust your gut. In the 1970s, a young couple decided to go for a late-night hike in the woods. A couple minutes into their walk, and the man remembers thinking something's not right. He tells his girlfriend, but they just decide to ignore it and keep going, until he steps on something that felt really soft, like it was alive. Before he has a chance to see what he stepped on, they hear all this rustling in the bushes next to them and they bolt. Years later, that couple turns on the TV and a death row inmate who's about to be executed is being interviewed. And they ask him, was there ever a time that you were almost caught red-handed? He responded, yes, one time. I was in the woods and a couple walked through and the man actually stepped on the body of a girl I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away. They didn't see me. That couple had run into one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy.
Yeah. It's not real. I don't even wanna go back home.